Thank you for tuning in. 25 minutes before 10 o'clock. I am so looking forward to this interview. Years ago, Robin and I did a few videos. I don't know, maybe 20 or 30. I don't know how many we did, but we started to do kind of like a series of videos called Notables, and it was songwriters and little mini biographies of songwriters, and one of them was Stephen Foster. And we went up to the Stephen Foster Cultural Center, I think they call it, up in White Springs. I'm trying to remember where it was now. This is a state park, Stephen Foster State Park. I'm just doing this from memory. I'm not really sure. But anyway, so we learned a little bit about Stephen Foster. And our state song is written by Stephen Foster. I don't even remember what it's called now. So Old Folks at Home? That's the one we use and it's had its share of controversy. For a while there was talk about replacing our state song with another one. In fact, they had a songwriting contest we were promoting. I don't know if you remember that. And then there was a winner, but they chose not to replace the song. So it's interesting how a work of art, like even our national anthem, has come under fire for perhaps having some of its lines that appear to be politically incorrect under today's microscope. So let's look at this a little bit. JoAnne O'Connell, I'm so looking forward to talking to you. You're on the phone. She's an historian. She has a background in classical vocal music. She's a researcher. She taught at colleges and universities in Pennsylvania and Maryland. And her book is called The Life and Songs of Stephen Foster, a revealing portrait of the forgotten man behind Swanee, Beautiful Dreamer, and My Old Kentucky Home. Good morning, JoAnne. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm okay. Where are you? Where are you calling from?
Actually, right now I'm in Maryland.
Okay.
This morning.
Yeah, and did I say anything that was incorrect? Let's make sure I have everything right in the opening. Anyway, did I say anything that was incorrect about Stephen Foster?
No, I think that's correct. He is very controversial now, and that's one of the reasons I decided to do this research, and for many years, and to find out more of the truth about him, because there's so many myths and so much misunderstanding about him and about the meaning of the songs and who he really was. And first of all, one of the basic misunderstandings, some people don't even realize that he came from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. But that's easy enough to find out. You can Google it. But who he was and the motivation and he had a fascinating life story. He was very young though when he died, but he lived during he died during the Civil War. He lived the antebellum years and the Civil War, and he was so beloved. But now he's sort of pushed under the rug. I mean, people don't talk about him. People don't remember him. The younger people, they don't really know about him as much. And I just thought it was something that I wanted to do to learn more about him and to research. I was in Pittsburgh. That's where I lived there. I really come from Florida. He did really write the state song I was Floridian. So, but in Pittsburgh, I researched all the original documents related to him, which is it's in Pittsburgh, most of the things. I also all over the country doing different research, to find out about him and to interpret him more through the history, the background of America at the time, and Pittsburgh and New York where he lived, because there's a lot of documents, but the documents were from the family. His own letters had been destroyed, if they did exist. A lot of anything was personal because the family wanted to protect his reputation. Later in life, he drank. They're worried about him, and then that happens. I think when you have a famous person in the family, that can happen. So.
So when in his lifetime did he make money from the music? I always heard that he didn't. And was he even famous? I guess one of the things I think about early writing at all, it's not like it wasn't then like it is today. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you really couldn't make a fortune writing a book back then, or you really couldn't make a fortune writing a song, especially. So those who did write probably wrote maybe for a little bit of a living, but mostly just because they enjoyed writing. Am I right about that?
Well, that's true. Stephen Foster was the first man to make a living. He did for a while solely on writing the songs. Some people wrote songs just as a hobby. You know, they had something else to do. The men who performed the songs, the entertainers, they made money, and then the men who published the songs, the publishers, made money.
Right.
And this was in the very early days of copyright protection. I think for songs, it was maybe like 1837, something like that. And yet, he would have protection if you bought a song, a sheet music from a publisher, and they were supposed to give him a royalty on it. But the performers could perform his songs anywhere, and they didn't have to pay him anything for that. That was not covered. And then the publishers, it seems to me that the publishers were contracting out to other publishers. Okay, you publish this. They would have their name. Foster's publisher was Firth Pond and Company, and their name would be in big type on the front of the sheet music, and then underneath it, you'd have about 3 or 4 other publishers who were secondary, but I don't think they gave Foster any royalties. And then there were other people who just heard the songs and made anthologies. They would publish a music book, and they'd have a lot of different songs in it, and then they didn't give him anything. And,
right.
I mean, so, and people would just sing the songs. The songs were known all over the world. He really wasn't known. And then, of course, the sad thing is his song, which is the state song of Florida, Old Folks at Home, Swanee River.
Right.
It was published without his name as composer on it. Edwin Christie, who was the minstrel performer, his picture's on the cover. And which they did. The performers, entertainers had their pictures on the cover of the sheet music that promoted sales. Right. But it usually said, written, composed by Stephen Foster and performed by Christie Minstrels. But in this case, Stephen Foster sold out the right to that song, to have it, so it says on the cover. And it said that way after his death. It continued to be published like that. Now, the publishers they gave Stephen the royalties. They knew he was the publisher, but
the writer.
It was just They knew that he was the composer, but I don't know how much other people knew. Eventually, I think the publishers used to write certain things in journals and says, yes, the Stephen Foster, publisher of Old Folks Home. So it kind of came out to the grapevine that he was really the publisher. But that was a tragedy, and that was a sadness for him, I think, throughout his life.
And I wanted to ask you this too, and I think the guy whose name was it Brand Robin? There was a black songwriter. Yeah. And he had written a song. I think it became a state song for a state. I can't remember if it was Ohio or what the heck.
Virginia. I think Virginia.
Virginia.
Carrying back to old Virginia, I think.
And they gave credit to Stephen Foster. And am I not right that he said, "Wait a minute, I didn't write that one," and then they put the correct man's name on there? Isn't that right?
I don't know the exact details. I do know that it sounded so much like Foster's music that people thought he had written it. But in reality, Foster, by that time, I don't remember the exact year that one was published either, but I think it was later. Foster, by that time, was writing a different type of music. And what's interesting that very few people realize is Foster's identified with minstrel and plantation songs, and yet he wrote very few of those, and he gave them up. There was a time period in history when the minstrel songs, the plantation songs, were very sympathetic to the slaves. And when he wrote Old Folks at Home, and he wrote My Old Kentucky Home, he was living in Pittsburgh, just on Allegheny across the river. And he was very good friends with a man named Charles Shiras, who was a poet and a newspaper publisher of his own, and he was an abolitionist. And he introduced Stephen Foster to abolitionism, and then the songs were written. They have messages of sympathy and for anti-slavery messages within the songs. And then by 1853, that was the year, the January, when they said that Old Folks at Home, My Old Kentucky Home was published.
Right.
That was that song. Then Stephen Foster didn't do more plantation songs after that.
So let's look. I want to look at some of the things that caused the modern day person to say, wait a minute, we should eliminate these songs because they sound racist. When we come back from the break, I want to do that because I think when you look at it through what you just said, through the eyes of what you just told us, we see it a different way. He was not expressing racism. He was basically painting a picture with words of the times in which he lived.
An historian is what he was.
As an historian, but also as just an average person who just simply could tell stories with a song. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's take a little break and we'll be right back. I'm loving this conversation, by the way. The book is called, I think I have the title here, Stephen Foster, right? Hold on, I have it right here.
The Life and Songs of Stephen Foster.
JoAnne McConnell is the author, and she's our guest, and we will be right back. This is WOCA.
Sunrise Automotive, this is Matt.
Hey, Matt, it's Dan.
Hey, Dan.
Listen, we're going to be doing some traveling, and I need to make sure the car is in good shape.
Why don't you just bring it on by? Let us check it out. We can check all your belts, your hoses, your tires, all your fluids. In out of town, is that up north in the cold?
Yep.
Okay. Let's check your antifreeze. Also, let's make sure your washer fluid has got alcohol in it so it doesn't freeze up north, because that makes for a rotten day. And let's check your air pressure in your tires. Let's look at your brakes. Make sure everything is safe and secure there. Let's go through it and just make sure everything is ready to go on the road. You due for an oil change?
Yep.
Whenever you come in to get your oil change, we always check your belts, your hoses, all your lights. We go through and make sure that everything is working properly. We check all your fluid levels. We do that every time you come in to Sunrise Automotive.
So just call you back at this number?
Yeah, just give me a call back at 690-1993 whenever you're ready to come in. And you can drop it off, leave it with us, whatever is most convenient for you. Look forward to seeing you at Sunrise Automotive.
Hi, this is JP from Penn Flooring here in Ocala. I would like to invite you to come in and visit our spacious showroom where we have solutions for every style and budget. From wall-to-wall carpet to hardwood floors and tiles, we have an unsurpassed selection of flooring. At Penn Flooring, we've provided quality customer service with a family touch for over 25 years. Visit our website at pennflooring.com or come by our showroom, 1201 Southwest 17th Street, just over the bridge. Penn Flooring, quality customer service with a family touch.
Central Florida Eye Institute is the area's leader in laser vision correction. From high-definition refraction surgery and LASIK vision correction to custom cataract, glaucoma, and diabetic treatment, you can count on Dr. Crowley and his effective, friendly staff to provide you with the quality care you deserve. Call 352-237-8400 for an appointment or more information. That number again is 352-237-8400. Looking forward to service your vision needs.
All right, 12 minutes before 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. JoAnne O'Connell is our guest, and I think she said she's in Pennsylvania. Is she in Pennsylvania or Maryland? Maryland, right?
I think.
I'm lost. The book is called The Life and Songs of Stephen Foster. If you've ever gone to the Stephen Foster Cultural Center, it's in White Springs.
Mm-hmm.
Then
yes,
maybe you've already investigated some of his work and some of his life stories. So how old was he when he died, JoAnne?
He was 37 years old when he died.
How old?
37, very young.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
I didn't realize that President James Buchanan was his brother-in-law.
Yes, his James Buchanan had a younger brother, much younger, named Edward Buchanan, and he married Stephen's sister, Ann Eliza. Ann Eliza Foster married him, and they lived in Pennsylvania, but they moved more towards the eastern Pennsylvania. And he was a minister there, and Buchanan was very powerful and a lot of money, and obviously the president. And there was a lot of connections. This Foster's family were Democrats, and this, of course, you have to understand that the Democrats were the conservative party, the Republicans were, more the newer party, radical. Yeah, but anyway. Because the family owed so much there were political connections, and Buchanan was known later in history that he gave out a lot of patronage, he gave a lot of jobs out to his relatives. He never married, and he had a lot of nieces and nephews, and Stephen Foster's, the nephew, actually moved into the White House with Buchanan later, who I think worked as his secretary. There was, another brother of Foster's was, the vice president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. So he was surrounded by some very powerful men, and it was very difficult for him. He didn't seem to have the strength to stand up all the time for his own convictions, so he wanted to express them very subtly. That's what I believe about him.
Political.
You mentioned earlier, JoAnne, that later on in his life he was writing a different type of music. What was he writing that's different from the work we know?
Well, it was during the Civil War. He moved away from Pittsburgh. His family had died or moved on, and he had some family members in Pittsburgh, but he moved away to be near his publishers. And during the Civil War, people didn't want those plantation songs anymore. And one of his publishers kind of asked him to write some. So when he got to New York, he wrote a few of them, but they were different. The world had changed, and people wanted happy songs. There was something, they wanted comic songs. They wanted songs they could laugh at. And the soldiers were in New York, the Union soldiers, and they didn't want to go and see minstrels on the stage. There was a new venue, and it was called a concert saloon. And there they had entertainment, which was variety acts. And this is the beginning of variety music, which later became vaudeville, which later became, we moved on into musicals. So all of these, they popped up. He lived on the Bowery, and between the Bowery and Broadway, there were music halls and concert saloons, which were pretty much the same thing, but the music hall was fancier, Yeah. And there would be women alcohol was served. The soldier could come in and buy a ticket very inexpensively, just pay for the drinks, really. And there would be acts they would see on the stage, and the alcohol was served by waiter girls, and they wore short skirts, high red boots. They were, some of them they thought were prostitutes. Some of them were entertainers. They would get up and sing on the stage and dance. And
my kind of place. Sounds like my kind of place. All right.
I mean, they were right. They were over the whole place. I mean, every few blocks you would see one. And Stephen Foster's publisher, right next door with the concert saloon. And the father of vaudeville, who was Tony Pastor, had the biggest music hall. And Stephen Foster did write a song for him, which is known because it was published with Foster's name, and he performed it at his big concert hall, 444 Broadway. And but he didn't give. Foster just at this point of his life, he was just writing songs, one song at a time, and trying to sell to an entertainer, trying to make free dinner. That was it.
I just want to interject something. I think what's important to remember is that there was no recorded music back in those days. There was no other way to hear music other than to hear it live. Mm-hmm. So a recording of music was literally on paper, which of course isn't music at all, but rather notes that are then interpreted by a musician. So, I mean, if you can picture a world where the only place you heard music was if you went into a hall like that, or perhaps if you had somebody who had a house with a piano. I'm guessing pianos were probably plentiful, but not as plentiful. Maybe guitars were everywhere. Who knows? Violins, I think, were pretty popular back then. But really, that's what was the only way you heard music, was to go into a live venue.
That's true. And as far as the pianos, I've done a whole chapter in there on the piano girls who were so important to the 19th century and to Stephen Foster's songwriting, because after he gave up the minstrel songs and plantation songs, he started just write parlor songs, which are for the girls in their home. But by this time, when he moved to New York in 1860 during the Civil War, he starts to write these new songs, and some of them, were better than others. But he eventually collaborated with a young man named George Cooper, who was a Union soldier. He was up around Gettysburg. They're not sure it was in the battle or not, but anyway, he was around there, and he came back to New York, and he met Stephen, and he wrote a different type of song. So Stephen was very smart, and he said this was a song factory. He actually was aware of that, and all the critics and the historians before have said that he lost his muse. He moved to New York. He couldn't write anymore, and that's why he didn't write any plantation songs. Well, the truth was nobody really wanted those kind of songs anymore.
Right. Okay. Can we
say he wrote wonderful songs that led the way to vaudeville. That's what I want to say.
Okay, I want to say this, because when people say we shouldn't have Old Folks at Home as the state song because it's got racial implications, in his time, the way the world was that he was writing about, that's the way it was. And you've already established the fact he was very much an abolitionist. So I don't really quite get what was in the problem with the words, except for maybe the choice of words, which back in those days, that was the way they spoke, right?
Well, he refined them, but the thing is, it was a complete racist society. And I don't think today, and people are hurt by that today, and people are sensitive. I mean, the fact they did change the words, and I think that's fine, because people are sensitive to that now.
Sure.
And I don't, I mean, these are historical music too. I mean, it served a function, and it wasn't really a pretty function all the time either. I mean, because there's a lot of historians have written about the purpose of minstrelsy, but I just think that if they want to keep the songs and want to hear them and want to listen to them and understand them, I think that's fine. I don't think that people anymore they're going to go in a horse and buggy. They're going to wear a hoop skirt anymore. I mean, if someone does those types of stuff, that they're offensive. I mean, the words have been changed, and they can be. And sometimes I've actually heard where they take the words out altogether. It's just instrumental music, but his message though, really, like My Old Kentucky Home was really, and it's in his journal, it was originally written Old Uncle Tom Goodnight, because he had just read, it was the same year that Uncle Tom's Cabin came out, and he read that, and he was writing an Uncle Tom song, and then he changed it because a lot of Uncle Tom songs were coming out, and he changed it to My Old Kentucky Home, but it was performed, they put on the musical version of Uncle Tom's Cabin in Pittsburgh, and he was totally involved with putting on that show, and they used his songs in it. And there was some newspaper article that they're going to stir up so much, emotion and sympathy for the slaves because of the songs that he wrote and using them in it. So he was
an irony, huh?
This,
it's an irony. I mean, compared to the way we hear the opposition to his work now, it's exactly the opposite of the opposition back then. It's kind of interesting, isn't it?
The opposition back then, that was during the time when everybody was very upset. I mean, he lived in a very, very stressful time, and very much of what his music did was to call people together, I think, and to soothe them and to make them feel better, and to also he was really much about, it was a very divisive society that he lived in. Eventually they all went to civil war and killed each other, but his music was for everybody, and he believed in that. And he lived in after his father lost the family home when he was an infant, and then they moved up across the river, and he lived in this house in a neighborhood that was a very diverse neighborhood, and they had immigrants, which were Irish in those days, and German, and they had African Americans, free African Americans, of course, in Pennsylvania, who lived there. And, there were the Scots-Irish. He heard that music. So he heard all of this different music that he blended together. And that was
JoAnne, we're out of time, but thank you so much for being on the air with us today. I want to make sure the listeners know how to get the book. Again, the book is called The Life and Songs of Stephen Foster, a revealing portrait of the forgotten man behind Swanee River, Beautiful Dreamer, and My Old Kentucky Home. JoAnne O'Connell is the author. And JoAnne, do you have a website we can go to?
I don't. It's at the Rowman and Littlefield published it, and I think there's information on Rowman and Littlefield is my publisher. Okay. And they have some information. And of course, the book is available, Barnes and Noble and whatever, all sources.
Probably Amazon, wherever the books are sold. Well, thank you for bringing this to our show. I think as the state song, the author and composer of our state song, it's important to know a little bit about him. And if you ever get a chance, go up to the Stephen Foster Cultural Center, I think is what they call it, right?
It's beautiful.
All right, we are up against the break. Let's take that break right now, and we'll be right back. Thank you, JoAnne. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala.
Fox News Radio, I'm Nillian Wu. Confirmation hearings today for 3 of the president-elect's cabinet choices. Retired General James Mattis for Defense Secretary.
Congressman Mike Pompeo as CIA Director, and Ben Carson to lead Housing and Urban Development. Carson, a retired neurosurgeon, will likely be questioned about his qualifications for HUD Secretary.
Fox Radio's Rachel Sutherland.
In prepared opening remarks, Carson says he understands housing issues, having been raised by